In this video, we'll see how to handle subscriptions using Stripe inside WeWeb and with Xano for this example, because we'll need a backend, but it could work with any backend. So in my example, I have a fake, really simple page with a fake email SaaS with monthly or yearly prices for free plans. And I'll add a fourth one just after this. But basically, when I click on this, it redirects me back to the checkout page. And then I can pay to get the plan added to my user. And then I get access to special features inside the WeWeb app because I have no access to the plan. So the first thing we'll have to do, for this example, I will create a new product because subscriptions are products. So if you saw the previous video with e-commerce t-shirts, it's the same. So it's products, but the difference is that they are tied to multiple prices. Here, 2 prices, and these prices are recurring, making so that when a user pays for them, it's actually a subscription. Sorry. So let's add a new product that I will call Scale. So the Scale plan. I will upload an image. So this one, and you see here, again, I need to enter my password, sorry for this. And you see here that, I will use the recurring option on my pricing. So let's make this 100 euro per month, so monthly. So you can select the billing interval. And let's add a new price by clicking on add pricing. What was it? Sorry, more pricing options. So now I want to add a next. So click on next to add a new one. So here, add another price. And then let's make it 1,000 euro, not USD. And let's make it yearly. So it's classic in SaaS. So the yearly plan is a bit less expensive. And now we can add the product to create it. Then, as we've done before, I will need to add this product inside my backend. So I will go in Xano, and you see here I've got a subscription table with all my plans. Could have named it plan, by the way. With the name, the image, the monthly price, the yearly price, the product ID, and the list of price IDs. So let's add the Scale plan. And I'm using all of this because I will need all of this inside WeWeb, of course. So the monthly price is 100, the yearly price is 1,000, the Stripe product ID is here. So let's copy it, paste it. And for the Stripe IDs, let's click on this, add 2 records. Let's enter the monthly price first because my logic in WeWeb will depend on this. So the monthly price, the default one is this one, and I will copy the ID here. And the yearly price here. And now I have my product. So I won't use the create payment link here. I will create a session because I will need to handle subscriptions and we need to create sessions for this. So let's get back first in WeWeb, where I added, the subscriptions collection, which is the same as my product before, except I'm getting all the subscription. And you see, I get my scale plan here, and to get them in the right order, I sort it by the monthly price ascending. And so I have everything here. And to handle the monthly and the yearly price, basically I've got a logic here based on my toggle. So let's show you my yearly toggle value. So you see here it's false, and when I click, then it's true. And to handle the prices here, what I've done is that I've got a simple formula, and I check if the yearly toggle is false, then I want to show the monthly price from my product, And if it's true, I want to show the yearly price. So it's as simple as that. And this will also be useful for the session, because when we'll create a session, we'll pass to Stripe which plan the user wants. So does he or she wants the yearly or the monthly price? And we'll need to create a specific session for this. So the way to handle this is actually if we go to create a session Stripe API, you see on their API here that we need to use this endpoint, so the checkout sessions, then send the secret API key. That's why we'll need a backend, because this key should be on a backend and not be visible to the end user. Then encode the success URL, the line items, so the prices and the quantity, and the mod here. It's a payment, but because it's a subscription, we'll need to use subscription at the mod. And because of this, because it's subscription, we can have only one line item. So line items are basically all the items the user is paying for, and there can be multiple for one-time payments, but for subscription, it can be only one. I will show you this just after, but basically the way I create this session is I've got an endpoint in Xano, which is not here, sorry, in the Stripe checkout. So actually they've got a nice plugin for this that I used, that I tweaked a bit, but you could recreate the endpoint yourself. It's not really complex. So here I will create a session using the post to sessions. And what it does is that it takes the success URL, cancel URL, and the line items, as the Stripe docs is mentioning. It gets the user from the ID. So this is specific. This is something that I've tweaked, because when there is a subscription, I want to tie it to a specific user, a specific customer in Stripe. I don't want the customer to be a guest customer. I want actually it to be a real customer in Stripe tied to my authenticated user in my app. So the way I do it is that this endpoint is for authenticated user only. So if I go here, you see it needs user authentication. And using the Xano Auth plugin and the Xano data source plugin in WeWeb, the user token is automatically sent to this endpoint, and I get back the user from the authentication ID. So if I go to auth, I get the ID from the user from the token, and then I get the user from the database from this token. Then I do a API request to the session. So with the URL we saw before, then I set some parameters in the body. So the success URL, which is from the input, the cancel URL, same, the payment method type, so you can change them, but basically here I only added card, so they can pay by credit card basically. Then the line item, so the product, the user will be able to buy, so they come also from here. And then we've got mod, so which here is subscription, so you should change payment to subscription to be sure to trigger subscriptions here. And then the customer, I get back the Stripe customer ID from my user. And don't worry, we'll get back to this just after. But basically, each of my users in my backend are tied to their Stripe customer ID. And I will show you how I've done this. So from the user I got before, I get only the Stripe customer ID. And then, as always, I use the authorization header with the Stripe API key that has base64 encode. And if the Stripe session response is not, there's no error, we send it back to as the response. So WeWeb will get back the response. And how I use it is that in WeWeb on my buy button here, it's not a link anymore, it's a workflow. So it's a handle payment workflow. And what I do is that I create a Stripe session by pinging this specific endpoint from Xano as just showed you. And in the body, I send the success URL. So the success URL is actually the URL from my success page in WeWeb, which I'll show you it just after. But the way I've done it is that I get the URL from the editor and the page ID. So page IDs, as I remember. So if you go to pages, you can have any of your pages IDs and even the path. So that's a way to create, to redirect to pages dynamically and not enter the specific URL. And if you want it to scale, because this is only for the editor, but if you want it to work also on the published app, you could do an if and base yourself, for example, on the current page. Sorry, where is it? Not the current page, but I think this. My bad. I think it's in the current page to environment, which is where, let me check, environment. Oh, it's in browser, sorry. So in browser, you have the environment. So you could do an if it's in the editor, then I want to link to the editor page. And if it's in production, I want to link to the production page. So the only thing you will have to change is actually the domain. And as always, I send back the session ID from Stripe using this variable, so the checkout session ID. If you remember well, that was in the Stripe docs, and it's a way to get back the ID on the front end when the Stripe redirects back to WeWeb. Then for the cancel URL, I just use the current page, so I redirect users back to the planned selection page, so the page they're currently on. And for the line items, basically, I want to send the prices I'm interested in using a specific object. So as you see, Stripe is expecting a price with the price ID and quantity with a number. So because it's a subscription, I put only one here, but this is the object Stripe is expecting. So it's explained in that docs too. So if I get back here, you see the line items here, price with the price ID and quantity with a specific quantity. And the way I've done it is that I use some small JavaScript to map the Stripe price IDs that are coming back from my database. So if you remember well, in Xano, if I go back to my subscription, here I've got my price IDs in a list. So the way I use them is that I map over them, and for each price ID from my database, I return an object with the key price, which is the price ID, and quantity, which is 1. But the thing is, if I do this, I have two prices. So for example, let's remove this. I've got two prices. But because it's a subscription, and this is really specific to subscriptions only, I can have only one price. So the way I've done it is that if the variable from my toggle, so actually this variable is yearly toggle, which is here. So for example, if I were to use it in my script, if I click, you see I get this variable. And variables in WeWeb, in JavaScript, they are identified by a specific ID. So this is a UUID, and you've got a small comment which is telling you the name inside the app. But in WeWeb internally, it's not called yearly toggle, for example. It's this ID. And what I do is that I do a if on this variable. So if, and I negate it. So if it's false, then I'm on the monthly price. So I want the first price from my list. If it's true, else I want the yearly price. So that way I'm sending the right price to Stripe session, and I create a session for the monthly or the yearly price according to what the user asked for. And this creates a session. So if I use the endpoint, sorry, I go in debug and I remove my search. If I go in my logs, you see here in my data, I get my session. And now I can redirect to Stripe. So what I've done is really simple, is that I redirect based on the URL from my checkout. So if you see here, checkout, I've got a URL. let's show it to you inside their documentation. It will be easier. So when you create a session, at the end here, you've got a session, which is the session Stripe created. You should redirect the user to get to the right checkout page. So it will contain all the information you sent to the prices, the user, the product, everything. And to do this, so I redirect based on the URL, and I've done a simple trick here to open a new window when we are in the editor, so that the editor doesn't break. Otherwise, it will open Stripe in the app iframe, which doesn't work. So I use window.open. Otherwise, I just redirect using the current page to the URL from my session. And if I test it, you see that I get on my checkout page. And because I sent a success page and a cancel page, if I go back here, I will get back to my cancel page, which is this one. And the success one is actually the success page that I created. So the success page, let me show it to you. It's here, and it redirects back to the plan page. Why? Because it does only one thing, is that it triggers a workflow that will update the user and redirect to the subscription example. I can even redirect to my paid plan private page. Nice. And I will explain to you why I've done this that way. But basically what it does is that it will just refetch the user to update it, to update the user. And why? You would say why? Let me show you why. If I go to inside Xano and I go in my user, you see that each user has a Stripe customer ID. And here you can see a Stripe subscription ID and a plan column. So basically what I do is that after a payment is successful for a subscription, I will find back the right user based on the Stripe customer ID, and I will update the Stripe subscription ID and the plan. And then in WeWeb, I can use this plan as a role to handle private pages. So for example, I should be able to say, if the user is paying for a specific plan or any plan, he or she can go to this specific page. Otherwise, they can't. So the way it works is that you need the Stripe customer ID for each user. Why? Because Stripe is only aware of this ID. It doesn't know the ID of your user inside your backend. So to find it back, you need to store it inside for each user. And the way to do it is actually to create a Stripe customer every time a user is signing up to your app. To do this, if I go on their documentation and I check create customer, okay, here you will see the endpoint to create a customer. So again, it's using their API on v1/customers, then also the private API key. That's why you need to do it again on a backend. So here we'll be using Xano and sending the name of the user if you wanted to, but especially and encoding the email. Stripe needs an email to create a customer. So the way I've done it is that in WeWeb, when a user signs up, it signs up with Xano. Classic email password. So nothing fancy here. The logic is actually in Xano. So what I've done is that I improved the sign up endpoints to create the Stripe customer. So if I go in the API in default, then off sign up, you see here that I've changed it a little, because normally it just creates the authentication token, it adds a recording user, but what I've done before is that I get a record. No, I don't get, sorry. This is also in the base endpoint. What I do is that if the user is has to be created, I do an API request to Stripe using v1/customers, and I send the email here, as you can see. And same, I use the authorization header using the Stripe API key. And then I return the results of the API call as the customer variable inside Xano. And what I do is that when I add the record in the user table in Xano, I use the email, the password, but also the ID from the response as the Stripe customer ID, so that I get the Stripe customer ID that was created for the user. So each time a user is created, the Stripe customer ID is added. And then, as usual, we return the auth token. And so it works in a way that the customer is added to Stripe. Let me show you actually how it works. So if I go back to sign up and I create a new user, so let's call it quentin.d@gmail.com and silly password, no worries. And then I sign up. So my user was created. And let's go back to the subscription example. So in Xano, if I go in my database, in my user, you see my new user is created and I've got the customer ID. And if I go to Stripe and I go to my customers, you see that a new customer was created. So this one, quentin.d@gmail.com, with the same ID as the one in my database. So now I'm able in Stripe to tie this customer to a subscription, which is really cool because we'll see why. So now let's create a fake payment. So for example, select yearly, go on the scale plan, buy. Then you see, because the user was sent to the checkout page, the user is tied here to the checkout page. And this is really cool because the user can't change so either her email or information. And that way you're sure that the user in Stripe is the same as the one in your database. And this is really important for subscription because you will need to check all the time if the user is paying for your products each month. So let's use the fake credit card from Stripe as always. Full name on card, Quentin D, pay and subscribe. And so now it's getting back, it will get back to WeWeb to my success page. And the success page will just fetch the user redirect. Yeah, so it has done it. And now I'm on my page only for paying user. And this page has a private access only for, paid users. So authenticated users that are in the paid users group. And this paid user is actually handled by Xano and WeWeb based on the role. So let me show you how it did work. So when there is a payment inside Stripe, I need to use what they call webhooks to send back this information to my backend, to Xano. And you need to use a backend for this because you need a server which is always running to do this, and a frontend is not able to do this. So you can't use WeWeb for this. You need to use Xano. And webhooks are a way to listen to any event that is taking place on Stripe and send this information back to another server. So what I've done is basically I use the webhook that when a subscription is created will ping Xano, and then I can use this information in Xano to update my user to tell my database, no, the user is paying, and then it will update in WeWeb as well. So let me show you how it works. So inside Stripe, in the search bar, you can search for webhooks. Basically, you can create any webhook, any number of webhooks you want. So here mine is already working, and you just need to enter the URL of the backend you're using with the endpoint, and then you can select. So if I update the details, you can select on which events you want to send to your backend. So here I'm only sending customer.subscription.created, which based on the Stripe docs happens every time a subscription is created for a user, basically, really obvious. And the way I would use it also on production is maybe listen as well to subscription, deleted, paused, resumed, updated, because I will need to update my user as well. Because if she or he is paying, stops paying or updates his or her plan, I will need to update my database as well. So for this specific example, I'm only using the created. And you see this one was sent only a few minutes ago. That's our webhook, and it got all the information with the subscription ID, the user, the customer ID, the plan ID. So you see here is the plan. Here's the products. You've got the user as well. So I think it's lower if I get back to it. But I will use this data back in Xano to update my database. So in Xano, how it works is that in my API Stripe, I've got a webhook endpoint, and I do all the logic to update my user. So this endpoint gets data from the webhook you saw. So I get all the data inside the variable in Xano. Then I get the Stripe customer ID from this data. So in Stripe data, data object customer, it's actually the Stripe customer ID. So if I go back here, oh, sorry, here, so customer, let me search for it. Yeah, you see here, customer with the customer ID. Oops, sorry. Then I get the user based on the Stripe customer ID I just got before. So I will be able to update it in the database. That's why we need to save the Stripe customer ID during the sign up in the database, because that's our way to get back the right user from our backend. Then I get the Stripe subscription ID also from the Stripe data, so the data object.id. I also get the product ID from Stripe data, object, items, and the first item, because it's an array, remember, I get plan.product, which is also the Stripe product ID. So let me show you actually in the webhook. So for the Stripe subscription ID, it's this one. So the first one. And for the product ID or plan ID, let me remember, product ID, it's data object items data plan products. Okay, so it's the first time it's actually hard to find which where is each ID. So if I go in price, you see here it's in product plan. Let me check. The product is here, you see. So that's what I'm getting back. And then I get a record from the subscription based on the, so the subscription is actually the plan in my database. So based on the Stripe product ID. So if I open my database, I get back the right plan here based on the Stripe product ID. So in this case, that would be the scale plan. So that I'm able also to find back the name. That's why I'm doing it, because Stripe only knows IDs, doesn't return the name by default. That's why I'm using my own database to do this. And I edit my user. So I edit only the Stripe subscription ID with the Stripe subscription ID I got before and the plan from the name of the subscription I got before. And I return success. And so by doing this, I update the user. So in WeWeb, that's why we only fetch the user. We don't need to fetch any other endpoint. And the way it works is that in my API, in the of me, so it's the data the backend is sending back to the front end. So here, WeWeb. In the output, I also added the plan. So in the customize here, you can add anything you want. By default, you only have the email and the ID. And I selected the plan here. That way, inside WeWeb, if I go on my user, so if I go in debug variable and I get to my user here, let me search for it. You see that I've got the email, but also the plan. So the plan is scale. And I know this data is fresh because it depends from the webhook that was just sent. And that way, I'm able to use roles inside WeWeb to prevent users that are not paying to go to a certain page, for example. So the way it works is that in my plugin, Xano, I've got a Xano auth, sorry. I've got my role key, which is plan. And then managing the role. So I created my role basic starter, enterprise starter. I will even add the new role, which is scale. And I created paid users. Well, basically, so let me update it. Starter, enterprise, or scale, or basic, even basic, yeah, because basic is paying. So they have any plan from here, but you could create any group you want. So for example, enterprise users would be only enterprise. And then you could even restrict this page to paid users or only enterprise users, for example. So that way you can do anything you want inside WeWeb. And that's the full explanation on how to use subscription using Stripe, WeWeb, and in this case Xano, but it will be the same with any other backend. So that was a bit long. I know that was a big thing. So feel free to go back and rewatch this video. The project will be available. I will add it in the description, but the project will be available, and I will also add the Xano snippets. But basically, think of it of having your product and your users in your backend, but also tied to the right ID from Stripe. Then from WeWeb, sending to the right checkout session that was created using your backend, and using a webhook from Stripe, updating your backend to say, hey, by the way, my user is paying for this specific plan now, so update it, please. And then in WeWeb, fetch again the user to get the plan, which who they are paying or not. And yeah, that's how it works. So, and in production, remember to change the URL. So because we only use the editor URL, for example, and the Stripe test API key. So you need the Stripe production API key, the right URL, but also to update your webhook to watch for updates and deletions of subscriptions, because otherwise, with what I've showed you here, a user who's paying but stops paying would still have access to the private pages. So the way to do this would be to also listen to changes in the subscription status. But you get the gist of it.